Thanks, Jeannie, and welcome everyone to the US Web Design System monthly call for June of 2024. And this month we're celebrating Juneteenth, just yesterday, with the USWDS logo in red, white, and blue. And we're also celebrating Pride Month in June, with the USWDS logo showing a selection of Pride flags, including the classic Rainbow Pride flag, the Philadelphia City Hall Pride flag with black and brown stripes in addition to the rainbow, Transgender Pride in blue, pink, and white, non-binary Pride in yellow, white, purple, and black, and the Intersex Pride flag with a purple circle on yellow. And today is also the summer solstice here in the Northern Hemisphere, the longest day of the year, with the USWDS logo in bright yellow, like the sun. Slide 2. My name is Dan Williams, he, him, and I'm the USWDS project lead. And here on screen is my avatar, dark hair, blue sweater, collared shirt. And I've still not updated this avatar to feature the glasses I now wear in real life, in addition to a blue collared shirt today and gold socks. As Jeannie mentioned, we are recording this call, and I'm happy to say we've started to be able to share these recordings publicly. You can find pretty much everything from our last year's worth of monthly calls back to January 2023 on our website at designsystem.digital.gov/about/monthly-calls. We typically post videos shortly after the monthly call, and we also link out to the slides and the script hosted at Digitalgov. We've also started collecting each month's Q&A as a GitHub discussion linked from the monthly calls page. We've posted a link to our monthly calls page in the chat. We'll be posting other links and references into the chat as we go along, and I encourage you to ask questions in the chat at any time. If any member of our team can answer your question in the chat, we'll do so. Otherwise, there'll be some time for questions and answers at the end of the hour. Also, be sure to introduce yourself in the chat as well. It's nice to know who's here, and it's good to have you here today. For those of you who find the chat distracting, you're welcome to close or hide the chat window during the main presentation, and you can also reopen it later during the Q&A session at the end of this call. So thanks. And with that, let's get started with slide 3. So what's our agenda for today? Well, we've got a couple new sites to feature and a few product updates. Then we're going to give a first look at a couple of USWDS web components to begin to give a sense of how this new technology could work in practice. And then hopefully still have plenty of time for Q&A at the end. Slide 4. So let's get into it with featured sites. Slide 5. First, we've got a new site from the Department of Treasury's Export Compliance Assistance Program, or ECAP. nnsa.nsis.anl.gov/ECAP. The ECAP provides export compliance training, assistance, and tools to raise awareness and promote export compliance across the Department of Energy and National Nuclear Security Administration complex. The ECAP homepage has a familiar USWDS look and feel, and its most prominent aspect is an alert informing its audience of severe restrictions for all interactions with Russia and Belarus. Slide 6. And this month, we're also highlighting ACC.gov, a site for the American Climate Corps, an organization inspired by the Civilian Conservation Corps of the 1930s that seeks to empower a new diverse generation to tackle environmental injustice and climate change. The ACC Home is an interesting example of customizing USWDS to achieve a distinctive look and feel tailored to a specific audience. The ACC homepage features a large mint-toned hero section with an illustration of wind turbines and the words, "Your climate career starts here." Slide 7. So congratulations. Great work. Be sure to let our team know when a new site launches, either with an email or a note in the USWDS public Slack channel. Slide 8. So now for a few product updates. Slide 9. So first, out now, USWDS 3.8.1, a small but mighty new release that addresses a couple important bugs. Slide 10. So here are a couple of the key improvements in USWDS 3.8.1. The biggest are a couple accessibility bugs we've addressed with the tooltip. Now the tooltip stays open when users are hovering over it, even if they're not hovering over the tooltip trigger. And additionally, now users can always dismiss a tooltip with the escape key. We also fixed an input mask initialization bug that caused it to fail if that input mask field wasn't a direct child of a form. We also improved the display of nested button groups. Now, nested button groups should match the height of their parents. And finally, we fixed an issue in our documentation where a data error introduced a typo into the Spanish translation of the identifier in USWDS 3.7.0. It was fairly obvious, but if you looked at that text after 3.7.0, you might want to look at it again here in 3.8.1. And those are the big updates in USWDS 3.8.1, which is out now. Slide 11. There's also always something going on in our public discussions on GitHub. And today I'd like to call out 4 discussions of note. So first, there's a new discussion open now for a chat component. That's like a new component discussion. So if you've worked on a chat UI or have some interest in making the case for chat-related components in USWDS, contribute to building out the proposal for chat in its discussion. We've also had some new activity in the glossary component chat as well, with folks providing some good examples of implementing glossary functionality, along with some discussion about accessibility considerations of different approaches. So if you have experience or thoughts working on a glossary solution, check out this discussion. We also have a new accessibility discussion for June, digging into how folks are using the tag component. We're interested in knowing the different types of uses for interactive tags. That is, tags that aren't only used to call out a category or special context for content, but have some kind of interactive element, whether it's linking off to similarly tagged content or filtering something like search results or something else. If you use tags, particularly interactive tags, let us know how you're using them. And finally, as I alluded earlier, we have the Q&A from our May monthly call posted in GitHub discussions. So if you couldn't make the last call, you can catch up on some of the items that came up as questions from the audience. Slide 12. And now an update on some of our ongoing usability research. Some of you may remember the research project we undertook last year focused on the most important things people need to be able to do on our website, what we call our users' top tasks. If you're interested, we talked about this in our April 2023 call, which is linked in the chat. Well, once we identified those top tasks, we needed to find out how easy or difficult it is for folks to actually do those things on our website. And that's what we just wrapped up, testing the performance of those top tasks. We looked at 5 top tasks in this study: browsing components, finding specific component guidance, finding specific pattern guidance, finding examples of sites that use USWDS, and getting design kits. Slide 14. We did 45-minute moderated usability testing sessions with 7 people who use the design system. Most of them described themselves as designers and researchers, with a couple of folks with a developer background, and 1 person who is a product manager. We expect to run another round of usability testing focused on developers, but for this round, we focused on designers. All the participants described their proficiency level with USWDS between like a novice with very little experience using it to intermediate, which was great because we were trying to get the perspective of folks who were newer to the design system and coming with fresh eyes. Participants came from 7 different agencies, and it was great to see such a variety represented. So let's just take a look at the high-level findings. Slide 15. So we observed that the most challenging tasks using our website were browsing components and finding pattern guidance. The reasons people seemed to struggle with these tasks had a lot to do with confusion about the words we use to describe things. For instance, we don't always share a common understanding between the design system and the people who use it of like what a pattern like actually is. Is it a repeating decorative motif? Is it a functional unit like a component? Is it an interaction? And we don't always have common words for specific components as well. In one of the task scenarios, we wanted folks to find the step indicator component, but none of the participants used that term themselves. Instead, they were looking for progress bar or progress indicator. Or instead of in-page navigation, they were looking for anchor links or jump links. There was some mixed success with finding specific component guidance, usability guidance within a component's page, with one of the scenarios being easy for people to complete, finding accessibility guidance for the button component, and the other being more difficult, finding accessibility guidance for data visualization. And the most successful tasks were finding examples of other sites that use USWDS, as well as finding the design kits. Still, we got some great insight into how to make those tasks even easier, since people still struggled with the design kit file feeling buried on its page. It's also hard for people to find the full showcase list of sites that use the design system, and there's room to improve how we present that list as well. Slide 16. So if we had to boil it down to one top takeaway from the study, it's that the way we name things doesn't always match user expectations. Participants often didn't intuitively understand something like the top level navigation and weren't sure what to expect in each category. Slide 17. So we have some actionable insights and clear next steps to help make some of these top tasks easier for folks. We'll be getting new issues on our project board and working on prioritizing some solutions. Some of these solutions are easier, closer to low-hanging fruit, like increasing the prominence of design kit files or adding better component synonyms on the component filter page. Some solutions will take a little bit more thought and research, like rethinking that top-level organization and finding increasingly clearer ways to talk about concepts like patterns. We'll have these things in mind as we move toward a new major version of the design system next year. And that's the latest on our usability research. Slide 18. And finally, this month we've published 5 more accessibility test pages. Test pages for the banner component, search, select, text input, and tooltip component. We posted links to these new pages in the chat, and we're working on 3 big component test pages for the next month, header, footer, and identifier. So stay tuned for those in July. And yeah, phew, slide 19. We've had a lot going on over the last month, and now we can talk about the main event here, like a first look at USWDS web components. So slide 20. As we're making our initial progress here, this work is very much in an alpha stage. So what exactly is the alpha stage? Well, we're still trying to define it exactly for ourselves, but at its broadest, it's an experimental stage, a stage where we explicitly value exploration over refinement. It's a place where things can and will change without warning, where we give ourselves the room to try a bunch of stuff out. Traditionally, alpha is an internal phase, but there's plenty of value in making this work visible. Just don't rely on it yet. Slide 21. From the start, however, there are a few general values we're trying to keep in mind as we work. And the first is simplicity. Like, we're really focusing on delivering components that are as easy as possible to install and use in a project. Components that don't require any initial compilation or anything like a knowledge of third-party technologies like SAS to get going. Slide 22. We also have this idea of encapsulation in mind. Like, we want designers and developers to have reliable performance wherever they use a component. Encapsulation in web components means that everything you need to use the component is built into the element, including not just the interactivity, but also the styles. And web components don't necessarily require an external style sheet for basic functionality. In web components world, we see the primary use for CSS in the setting of CSS variables or CSS custom properties, not necessarily in any necessary or additional CSS rules. Something like CSS still has an important role to play, but not for default display and functionality. And Because kind of like the display of a USWDS web component is somewhat distinct and separate from conventional CSS, this also means that USWDS web components will be largely unaffected by any existing styles on your site. And that includes styles associated with non-web components versions of USWDS. Traditional USWDS and web components USWDS will be able to sort of exist together in parallel on a project. And we expect that that will happen frequently. Slide 23. So related to the idea of CSS and styling, like we're thinking about our components through the lens of configuration. How to use component attributes and things like CSS variables to control theming instead of custom CSS rules. When we're thinking about configuration, we really see the future of USWDS theming as closer to a settings file than a style sheet. Slide 24. And finally, as we're doing this, we have what we might call like a web platform orientation. Like we're trying to deliver a design system that's built with native web standards-based solutions that support the web as a platform. HTML, CSS, and JavaScript have changed since the early days of the design system. And while we've not lost sight of these changes as USWDS has evolved over the years, this new version is our best opportunity to really embrace the way the web as a platform has matured and evolved, and to position ourselves to continue to evolve alongside it. Slide 25. So let's take a look at what we're building. And to do that, I'd like to introduce a couple of my colleagues. First, James Mejia. James is an engineer and a contractor on the USWDS core team. James, can you introduce yourself and give a brief self-description for anyone audio only?
Yes, of course. Thanks, Dan. Hello, everyone. My name is James Mejia. I have short, dark hair, brown skin, and a blue button-up. Happy to be here today.
Awesome. Thanks, James. Slide 26. I'd also like to introduce Matt Henry. Matt's our new engineering lead, and we're very pleased to have him on the USWDS team. Matt, can you introduce yourself and give a brief self-description for anyone audio only?
Thanks, Dan. Hey, everyone. I'm Matt Henry. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm an engineer at 18F, currently acting as engineering lead for the USWDS. For accessibility purposes, I'm a bald white man with glasses and a close-cropped white beard and the obligatory blue button-down. I've been working with the design system for a couple of months now to help bring the next version of the design system into being, and I'm super excited to show you some of what we've been working on.
Great. Thank you, Matt. So let's see this in action. Matt and James will take the demo from here, starting with Matt. So Matt, why don't you share your screen and take it away?
Thanks, Dan. Alrighty. Let's do this. All right. First, by way of disclaimer, I should say that as Dan mentioned, everything you see here today is in either an alpha or a pre-alpha state. So some of the things about how this is all going to work will change by the time we ship code that you'll actually want to include in your projects. Now, this is going to be sort of a reintroduction to USWDS. So let's go back to basics with the USWDS tutorial project that you might recognize from some of these monthly calls. I'm going to start with a clean install of the tutorial. So you can see everything I'll need to do to get something working. You may have gone through this tutorial before, so it might look familiar. Now, just to prove that there's nothing up my sleeve, here's a clean git status on the main branch of the tutorial. Great. And I'll point out in my VS Code window here, I'm going to be jumping back and forth between a couple of windows. So this one here with the red kind of banner up top is going to be the demo, the site that we're building, the tutorial site. And this one with the blue banner up top is the actual web component code that we'll be importing. So if you're confused, look for the banner. All right. So we originally developed this tutorial to walk through installing the design system and a couple of components on a site that doesn't use USWDS. So not only does this fresh install not have USWDS on it already, but it's also just a great way to show us, to show how we might install a web components-based version of the design system. Now, the first task that the tutorial wants you to take on is adding the banner. This is the component you've probably worked with many, many times that tells users that they're on an official government site. So it's a good place to start. So let's get going and install the banner component. I am doing a little NPM magic here. This is not actually on NPM yet. Again, alpha, and we're not at the point where we're shipping actual code to NPM. Banner. You can pretend that what I'm doing is NPM install at USWDS/banner. Okay. And just to prove that this is all live, there's a high severity vulnerability in the USWDS tutorial repo. So just, again, proving we're working without a net here, folks. All right. Now, the tutorial site is built with 11D. You don't need to know anything about 11D to follow along with what I'm doing, but I'm pointing it out because the next thing that I'm going to do is just a tiny bit of 11D configuration just to make use of the component we just installed. So I'm going to jump over to the 11D configuration. I'm going to paste this in. This is, again, just some 11D config, not super relevant to the substance of the demo, but all this does is copy the component code that we just added to the project out of the node modules and into the assets folder in the built site. If you use 11D, you might do something similar. Now I'm going to go ahead and spin up the 11D dev server. Which just gives us this tutorial site that we've been looking at. So now that we've done that setup, we're ready to add the banner to the site. So let's go ahead and do that. Get that terminal out of the way. Go back to our markup. And I'm just going to dump this right here in the top of the page. I'm adding a script tag that's going to pull in our banner code. And I'm going to add the USA banner tag. All right, it's fine. There we go. Look at that. It's a banner. That's literally it. And the only reason we even needed to touch the 11D configuration is because we installed that local copy of the component. So we need to get that code out of the node modules folder and into the website itself. If we were using a cloud-hosted version of the component, we wouldn't even need to do that. And all we would need to do is just add the script tag, and we could use the USA banner tag straight away. So now let's see what we get out of the box. The banner toggle just works. CSS is included. We didn't add any links to CSS files. We didn't mess with theme settings. We didn't touch any image paths to get this working. All the images are part of the build. I know you're noticing the chevron is missing. We'll see why that is in a second, but that's, again, you know, this is all a work in progress, folks. But I just wanted to call out the missing chevron because I know you noticed it. So yeah, we didn't install USWDS compile. We didn't configure gulp. We didn't mess with theme settings. We didn't touch any image paths. That's all done at build time when we bundled the package. So what are some other things that we can do with this banner? How about if we wanted our banner to be in Spanish? Let's try it. How can we do that? There you go. It's that easy. And now just to prove that this is a plain old HTML element. Sorry, just to be clear what I did, I just added a lang attribute to the USA banner element itself with the value of ES for Espanol, and it just worked. So So again, just to prove that this is just a plain old HTML element, let's do some JavaScript on it. Going to go back over to the tutorial site window. I'm going to move the zoom command out of the way. There we go. Yeah, that's enough of that. All right. I'm going to go to the console. And let's say, thank you for having that in my history. Just saying, I'm grabbing the banner element using document.query selector, just plain old browser DOM method, and grabbing the USA banner element and assigning it to the variable, well, the constant banner. There we go. And banner. Now that we have it, we can do stuff to it. Look at that. I'm toggling the banner from the command line. So toggle is just a method on the USA banner class that is the class that makes up this element. And it's part of the public API for that class. So you can call it yourself programmatically if you need to. Now that we've seen it in action, let's go over to the code for this component and take a look under the hood at how we got here. So just a few things that I want to point out quickly. Right here at the top, we're importing a bunch of things from a package called lit. Lit is a lightweight library that gives you some useful tools for creating and working with HTML custom elements, aka web components. I'll use custom elements and web components interchangeably probably throughout the rest of the talk. Now, right away, when we create this component, we're making a new class that extends from lit element. If we were making a component without a library, we would be extending from the HTML element class directly. But as I said, lit gives us some superpowers to make all of this easier and less verbose. But if you're curious about lit and want to know more about why we're using it, there is some documentation about it and that decision in the USWDS proposals repo. Now, scrolling quickly through here, you can see a bunch of JavaScript. Remember, here's that toggle method that we just called, which, as you can see, all it really does is switches the Boolean value of the is open prop, which is declared up here, and then toggles the hidden attribute on the element itself. And then finally, so we can keep scrolling. It looks like JavaScript. You've seen JavaScript. Some markup here and CSS. This is all taken more or less verbatim from the current version of the component, as is this markup. And when we get all the way to the bottom of this file, there's this call to custom elements define. Now, this is a web standard method for taking the class that we implemented above and telling the browser what HTML tag name we're going to use to actually bring all of this function or this functionality into our web page. So we're talking about the banner here. So we're stuffing all this code into a tag called USA banner. You can tell it's a web component because it's a dash. Part of the standard for custom elements is a requirement that custom element tag names include a dash to set them apart from elements that ship with the browser. So that sort of concludes our whirlwind tour of the banner code itself. But while we're here in the repository for the components, I can show you how I did that production build that shipped the version that you saw running in the browser there. And you can see those errors that I was just talking about. We are currently working with a monorepo, which we'll talk about more in just a second. This is why I don't like typing in front of people. All right, did we do that? We did it, great. So yeah, Vite, we're using a tool called Vite to bundle this stuff, which just literally goes through, pulls in all of the dependencies for this file and emits a single JavaScript file that has them all kind of rolled up inside. So again, you'll notice that the component we're building here is just the banner by itself. We're planning to ship each component as its own package so that you can use them a la carte, as it were, and only bring in the components you need for your project. And if you choose to do that, you'll be able to do that ideally without a build step. And this will also let you add new versions of the components as we ship them. So you won't need to wait until we have the whole design system rebuilt in web components before you start working with them. All right, now let's get back to demoing. I'm going to switch back over to that tab or that VS Code window. We saw before with the language in the banner how we can customize components using attributes. Those attributes are basically part of the API that you'll use to interact with and customize components. But what about theming and visual style? So to answer that, I'm going to use another component, the humble but mighty USA link. So I've already built and linked that. So we can go ahead and add it to the project the same way we did with the banner. And we'll just add that 11D config to do that. And then I'm going to add it to the page. Let's just make sure we save that. All right. Yeah, see, here you go. That's, again, what we're talking about with the, some of the images aren't quite there in the banner, but that's a path issue, not a serious breaking problem. But don't be distracted by errors. Like I will try not to be. All right, so we've added the script tag for the link element, and I'm just going to go ahead and copy this in so you don't have to watch me type. All right. All right, so we've added the link. We've got a link there. And because the link component, like the banner, has USWDS styles baked into it, you can see that when the link is active, it has the big blue focus outline that you expect to see. But what if we want to change that? We can crack the component open. I'm going to DevTools to inspect that element. I'm going to shrink this down a little bit. All right, so here we have our USA link. And inside it is a plain old anchor link that you are, used to working with. It has the USA link class applied to it. And so if we wanted to change something about how the focus styles are applied, you'd think we know how to do that. We know how to change styles that are on elements with class names, right? So let's just test that theory. And I'm going to copy in some styles again, just to save you the pain of watching me type and me the pain of doing it live. And yeah, no, I'm not endorsing putting script and style tags everywhere throughout your document, but we're doing a demo here. All right, so we have added a outline color of hot pink to the USA, to links that have the USA link class on them. Let's see if that worked. Oh no, it didn't work. And the reason it doesn't work is because of, let's go back, we find that element again. There we go. This shadow root thing here. So the link in there is in part of what's called the shadow DOM. In a nutshell, shadow DOM is just markup that the component writes. And you can think of that sort of in contrast to light DOM, which is the markup that you write. But what's important here is that styles from outside the shadow DOM don't apply inside of it. And so a lot of time, that's what we want. But you can see like the style tag is outside of that component, so it's outside of the shadow DOM. So a lot of times that's what we want. This provides some of that encapsulation that Dan was talking about that protects your component from being styled by whatever styles happen to match it on whatever page your component ends up on. But it also means that styling components is just a little bit trickier than maybe you're used to. Fortunately, there are a couple of ways for styles to make their way into the shadow DOM. And one of those is with CSS custom properties or CSS variables. Unlike most CSS properties, the values of CSS variables do cascade into the shadow DOM. So anything we set in a CSS variable will be available for our component to use. So if we go over to the code for the link component, I'm going to jump back over to that VS Code window and look at the styles for the component. You can scroll through and see, all right, here's some stuff about focus. And look at that. Here is a CSS variable theme focus color that looks like it probably does what we want. So let's go back to our demo code. And again, I will just actually, here we go. Rather than setting the outline color property in just plain old CSS, we will change the value of that theme focus color. There we go, 1R in color. And there we go, it worked. So you can see the hot pink focus outline on the link coming soon to USWDS. I'm kidding. But what we've seen is that there are a couple of ways to customize components. You can do it with attributes, which work similarly to the props that you might be used to if you're coming from something like React or Vue. And then there are CSS variables that let you apply themes or do other kinds of look and feel customization. So you can think of attributes and CSS variables as being kind of part of the public API for web components. They're basically the levers and switches that component authors build into their components to let you customize them in predefined ways. There are other ways to extend and customize components, but we will dig into those in a future monthly call. So for now, I want to hand demo responsibilities over to James Mejia, who will show off our new Storybook setup and some of the variants of the handful of components we're currently working on.
Great. Thanks, Matt. We started using Storybook in USWDS 3 for internal development. The work that we do in the USWDS repo eventually appears on the website, which has the full guidance. This isn't a bad process, but it separates the user-facing documentation from the code. As we move forward with USWDS 4, we want to explore ways to add more relevant documentation in Storybook. So for a good part of our web component development, this is where our documentation will live. As you can see with the USA banner, we're taking advantage of the Auto Docs plugin to create a single page with the component settings. As we scroll down, we can see a preview of all of the available variants. So you'll see default here, custom ARIA label, custom content, mil, Espanol Gov, and Espanol mil. I'm going to click on the default. So we want every component to have controls so that the user can test these components before using them. You can see the default banner includes label, TLD, which is top-level domain, and lang settings. We can modify these settings to update the component. Let's modify the lang field to ES and watch the component change to the Spanish variant. There we go. Next, let's check out the custom ARIA label variant. So it's a little hard to see here, but the label setting allows us to update the banner's ARIA label. This is useful when we're using the custom content variant, which is right below it. The custom content variant uses lots. So if we're using a different language outside of English or Spanish, we can update the ARIA label to match the new language. If we click on the custom content banner below, we'll see even more controls. So here you're seeing a French version of the banner, and all of the fields below have been customized with French strings. So you'll see the label, the ARIA label is now in French. The banner text, action, and heading are in French. And if we modify it, it'll update in real time. So we have more work to do, but our goal is to have more relevant documentation and controls in our component library. That way you have everything you need in one place. So I'll click over to the identifier, and you can see that the other components follow a similar pattern. For example, here on USA identifier on the screen right now, we're trying to document all of the ways that you can use it. As I mentioned earlier, we want to improve documentation and show developers what components offer. We also want to document how we develop components for ourselves and for contributors. We hope that our documentation work in Storybook will be more relevant and publicly available in the near future. Thanks, everyone, and now I'll pass it to Dan.
Thank you, James. I had to remember to turn my camera on. Got like into watching everything and forgot I was still a presenter here. So let me present and get into the last couple slides here. All right. So this is Dan, and this is slide 28. So thank you, Matt, and thank you, James. There's still significant work ahead of us, but I think even our first steps are pointing in a clear and, to me, exciting direction. If you're interested in this work and want to follow along with our progress, we have a new and very alpha GitHub repo where this new work lives. You can find it over at github.com/USWDS/USWDS next. I expect it will see some big changes over the next few months. It's a bit like a new USWDS young adult moving out of its parents' house and into its first new place. And we hope to grow up pretty quickly. Slide 29. So what's next with this project? In the next couple months, we're going to be working to get these alpha components into a beta phase and publish them on NPM. We're also going to begin work on a handful of other components. I currently expect these to be something like button, accordion, card, text input, and modal. This next handful of components should be in a beta phase by September. Slide 30. And then by the end of the fall, we should have at least a dozen components in stable beta. We're going to be adding engineers to the team as well, so our progress should start to speed up as we develop our web components conventions and tooling. And this initiative is what it's all about for us for the foreseeable future. So expect plenty of updates in these monthly calls, as well as in our newsletter and on GitHub. Slide 31. So onward. This is the first step of many, and here we go.